bring new people on to get them up to speed as quickly as possible. So it is an important topic that is being looked at specifically in our region, and we are absolutely supportive of that and in need of that, just like other agencies across the country. So I'll keep you abreast of that, but that is an important issue going forward for our agency and all agencies actually across the country. What I wanted to do a little different this morning is, for those who may not have been aware, EPA is celebrating their 50-year anniversary, the 50-year anniversary of the Clean Air Act, 1970 to 2020. And so there was tons of information about the celebration, and if you want to see what they had to say, that's at www.epa.gov/50. We'll send these links out to you, but it was a great site. It covered the history of the Clean Air Act. It talked about their priorities, and then an analysis of where that agency thinks it is today. So again, just great information. They also produced a nice informational and data-centric type piece entitled Our Nation's Air. And I'll send a link out that to the board members, and of course it'll be in our notes when they get published on our website. But I just want to talk a little bit about what we saw in it, and it's a great piece. It contains multiple charts, graphs, a lot of trend analysis to look at nationally. And I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about some of those national air quality trends and numbers. You know, we often talk at this board meeting about our air quality locally, not so much about what we see nationally. And so I just thought this might be an interesting detour this morning. As you might expect, national concentrations of air pollutants, like in Louisville, have dropped significantly, and they were using the data since 1990, not since 1970. But here are just a few of those highlights. And these are, again, remember, national trends. Carbon monoxide, the 8-hour concentrations are down 74%. NOx annual concentrations are down 57%, and the 1-hour concentrations are down 50%. Ozone 8-hour concentrations are down about 21% nationally. PM 2.5 annual concentrations are down 39%, and then 24% concentrations, the 24-hour concentrations are down about 34%, and this is since 2000 for PM 2.5. Sulfur dioxide, 1-hour concentrations are down a whopping 89%. And so just as we've indicated here locally, these reductions have occurred as there have been more cars on the road, more vehicle miles traveled, increased populations, increased energy use, and all of this has taken place while the national economy has grown 275% since 1990. Needless to say, clean air did not tank the national economy, and we've talked about that locally, the growth in our local economy as we've seen significant reductions in air emissions. What we see nationally as the emission sources by category are really kind of similar to what we see locally as the source drivers of emissions. NOx is driven by stationary fuel combustion sources nationally, including electric generating units and on-road vehicles. Direct PM 2.5 emissions are by and large from stationary fuel combustion sources and industrial sources. SO2 at 75%, primarily from stationary fuel combustion sources. VOCs, 75% of those nationally are from industrial and other processed vehicles. Another interesting data comparison nationally was one that they did on unhealthy air days for sensitive groups. And so obviously this includes unhealthy air days attributed to PM 2.5 and ozone. Nationally, unhealthy air days have been well under 1,200 days a year since 2013. And we're at 799 days in 2018. And so while I understand that looking at these as an average number of days per state may not be representative for any given state, but I think it does give and provide a perspective to the numbers. So in 2018, there were 16 unhealthy air days for sensitive groups per state. In 2001, that number would have been 43 days per state. So it does illustrate the overall decrease that we've seen nationally. And just by way of comparison, and because ozone is an issue for Louisville, it's important to note that Louisville is not alone in its fight to lower ozone. In 2018, EPA designated about 52 areas in 22 different states, including the District of Columbia, as non-attainment for the 2015 ozone standard. So our fight with ozone is not a solitary struggle, and as best we can, we'll do our work here, but we'll also take a look at what's being done nationally to help address that issue. Nationally, the National Air Toxics Assessment data shows decreases in air toxics across the country in a small number of areas. Most of the country is holding steady according to what EPA has provided in terms of air toxics. And then we are seeing some increases in a few locales across the country. Fortunately, as you know, due to STAR, through 2017, Louisville has seen about a 73% decrease in total air toxics, which is a number that I think kind of speaks for itself. So there's a lot more information on the site and links to additional information there if you'd like to take a deeper dive into any of those issues. But it really was some interesting topics, an interesting look at historically how the Clean Air Act has worked, and a good look because you can drill down to individual states and look at different states, how what kind of issues they're having, how they're responding to them, and it gives you a good comparison to as to where we are locally. And so, you know, again, hope you appreciate it. Just wanted to bring a little national perspective to the very local discussion that we have monthly. And then, you know, the last word I really kind of want to have this morning is about our budget and its impact on the district. And the budget that's currently proposed and the impacts from the pension crisis over the last 2 years have been cause for great concern. And even though we've been able to manage our core work and operations and move through, we've been able to do that because the district was very thoughtful and very strategic in the decisions that we made. And so, again, we didn't suffer any serious impacts to our core operations. But I want to be clear this morning to the board that there have been impacts because of the uncertainty and our inability to quantify what will certainly be future financial budgetary impacts. I wanted to highlight what we see as the important impacts strategically into our planning the current financial situation has on our current work and our future work. So obviously, what we've seen over the last 3 years has been stagnant budgets. Haven't seen any growth, which has made it difficult for us to kind of move forward in certain issues. Those stagnant budgets also do something else. They make it really hard for us to plan, even in the short term, and put any hard dates in any of the planning that we have out there, simply because we don't know what financial resources might be available, and in some cases, what financial resources may be taken away. And I really don't want to start down any paths in terms of work that we're doing that we have to back off of, either with the public and certainly with our staff. And so we walk a very delicate line of trying to being prepared to plan. We are prioritizing and understanding what direction we want to go in when circumstances change, and then we can move forward. These current budget impacts over the last 3 years have impeded our ability to look at and plan for future projects, such as grant opportunities and EPA collaborations. And so when those opportunities present themselves, we have to take a really hard look at them, and we have to look at our resources. And in fact, we've kind of passed on a couple of different things simply because of that uncertainty. It impedes our ability to look at internal projects due to staffing constraints. And so one of the things we want to make sure that we don't do is our staff is working really, really hard, and so we don't want to do anything that overextends during these current circumstances. Previous long-term strategic planning that we had done as far back as 3 or 4 years ago included new positions. We had identified future staffing needs that included increasing our modeling and forecasting capacity, which have been put on hold. We had looked at additional environmental coordinators to support the increased outreach that we're trying to do, our work to increase our community engagement. That's an important part of the work that we do. We need to do more of it. We need to do it better, but that takes folks. And then additional program development. And so we had looked at, again, increasing our environmental coordinator positions. And then also, one of the things we've worked really hard at, and it's really being strained and stressed. We have folks that are getting pulled in all kinds of directions, and especially at our top levels, is our work to be a resource for metro and community partners and make sure that the air quality message and the air quality work that we do, where it is appropriate, is involved in all the decisions that are made across the city. There are a lot of things going on. We have limited staff, and the folks that we have are really starting to feel the stress of trying to be there for not just the work that we do, but also be there for the important work that the Office of Sustainability is doing, for the work that Economic Development is doing, the work that the Health Department is doing. And so these are all things that we saw coming down the track that we wanted to be a part of 3 or 4 years ago, that we began planning for. And then since the pension fund crises, and now with the COVID virus, these are all things that have kind of been put on hold. And one other thing that I'd like to bring up, as we start to get more and more data from our air toxics monitoring, as we begin to get that, we do the analysis. We don't know what that data is going to tell us. We don't know what, when we get that information, what it's going to require us to do. But again, any of that additional work at this point is really going to stress our resources. And so all of these are the things that the impact that we're seeing. And while we're doing a super fantastic job, and really a shout out to staff for doing what we're doing, keeping our core operations, doing some expansion and some additional work where we can, we have been impacted in terms of our strategic planning and what we want to do going forward by the financial crisis that Metro government finds itself in. So for right now, we continue to look at our plans, to think about it. We try to stay prepared, understanding where we need to go, prioritizing to do those things that we can do while we wait to do those additional things, and really trying to be agile enough to respond in what has turned out to be a very, very dynamic financial environment for us. I'll tell you this much I know. Our current reality looks nothing like what we planned for and envisioned just 3 short years ago. And so we are really kind of flying by the seat of our pants in some regards. But as we do that, we try to do so with appropriate planning and being prepared to take advantage of opportunities where we can. But I did want to stress, because I know I've actually gone overboard maybe in terms of making sure the board understood that we were getting our work done and moving forward, and kind of actually used the statement business as usual. But I did want to make you aware that we have felt impacts, and it's more on our strategic planning and our growth and expansion opportunities. But I did want to make the board aware of that. So first, I'll ask if there are any questions from the board, and then if not, the final part of the director's report this morning will be a discussion of COVID-19 air quality impacts. And we talked about this a little bit at a previous board meeting, and we said we'd come back with some additional information, and that be presented by Brian Paris, our APCD data analyst and quality assurance and air toxic supervisor. So if there's no questions, I will turn this over to Brian.
No questions from me. Any board members have any questions?
Not for me.
Thank you, Mr. Talley.
You're welcome, Brian. It's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Talley. Good morning, Chairman Hilton. Good morning, board members. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here, so bear with me for just 1 second. Okay, can y'all see that opening slide?
Yes.
Good, good. So good morning again. As Mr. Talley mentioned, we wanted to share a preliminary analysis of some of the air quality data that we collected here at APCD from the last couple months. Okay. So this is just a reminder, and Mr. Talley mentioned a lot of this already, but we are still monitoring pollutants. We're still operating our instruments and maintaining those instruments, and we're still validating the data to ensure that we are producing high quality data. We have not had any significant data loss because of the COVID-19 pandemic to this point. There's certainly been some challenges, but for the most part, we've been able to handle that pretty well. We have begun to review some air quality data for the last couple months, and along with that, we've been trying to quantify the impacts of meteorology and how that also affects air quality. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. Now, before we get into that, there certainly are some challenges with this type of analysis. First off, contrary to some of the reports that you've may seen in the media, Louisville's air quality concentrations are generally low compared to some of the larger cities throughout the world where we've seen reports of very significant reductions. Louisville's air quality is closer to natural background levels than those cities, so it's more difficult to kind of tweak out some of those subtle changes in air quality. And again, another complicating factor is how meteorology affects air quality as well. So those two factors certainly make it a challenge to understand the real change, maybe from emissions. Here's a chart that kind of summarizes where Louisville is in comparison to some larger cities throughout the world. The little dotted line that just popped up towards the bottom, just under, say, these are PM 2.5 concentrations. And so that dotted line at the bottom is Louisville's average PM 2.5 concentration in the springtime. So we can see it's quite a bit lower than some of the other major metropolitan areas throughout the world. And so, a 50% reduction in emissions in Delhi might equate to a 40 microgram per meter cube drop in PM 2.5, but that same 50% reduction in emissions here in Louisville might, equate to a 3 microgram per meter cube drop. So even though both areas may be seeing a similar reduction in emissions, we don't have quite as much room to work with since we're already pretty low. Now, before we get into sharing some of the data, just wanted to review some of the factors influencing the ambient concentrations. Most simply put, our ambient air quality concentrations are it's emissions and meteorology. Now, typically the greatest variable from a day-to-day standpoint is meteorology. Emissions can be generally thought of as being somewhat constant from a day-to-day standpoint. When we see changes in concentrations from day to day, that's typically driven by the meteorology. Just to review a couple of kind of scenarios of how the meteorology can impact. This is a scenario where we would have the same meteorology, but we have a change in emissions. So that horizontal line on the top of those figures there can sort of depict the topmost layer of the atmosphere that pollutants can be mixed in. So that's called the mixed layer. And so in this situation, our mixed layer is the same. So the amount of volume of air that the emissions have to mix in are the same. And in one case, we simply have lower emissions and higher emissions in another case. So not surprisingly, your higher emissions case is going to result in a higher concentration, in this example, 20 micrograms per meter cubed. And in your lower emission case, you're going to have a lower concentration. Again, this is equal meteorological conditions. Now, that's not normal. Meteorology changes from day to day. In a more realistic case, you'll typically have similar emissions from day to day, but your meteorology is going to change. So on the case on the left, we have very stagnant conditions, so a low mixed layer, low wind speeds, which compresses a lot of those emissions to a much smaller volume. So in that case there, we might have a PM 2.5 concentration of 25 micrograms per meter cubed. In the case on the right, we have a much more favorable day for meteorology. So your mixed layer is higher, your winds are much stronger, and that creates much better dispersion. And so your emissions are much better mixed throughout the atmosphere, resulting in a lower concentration. So when we look at the air quality data from the last couple months, again, the meteorology is important to consider. And so what we've done here is I'll show you two charts. This is just for the month of April, and then we'll show you a chart for the month of May. And for the month of April, we're showing NO2, nitrogen dioxide concentrations. We're showing carbon monoxide. So the NO2 is the blue line, carbon monoxide is the red line, and then the green bars are PM 2.5 concentration. So again, this is for the month of April for the last 4 years. So it is important when we try to assess, any kind of impact that the COVID-19 pandemic, social distancing measures have had. We certainly want to look at the same time period, so the same month in this case. And as we can see with nitrogen dioxide, we did see a fairly significant reduction in 2020 for the month of April compared to prior years. Carbon monoxide, we didn't see that big of a change. I think it ended up being, the table at the bottom here shows your percent change in each pollutant or meteorological parameter compared to the prior years. So very slight decrease in carbon monoxide, fairly significant decrease in nitrogen dioxide. And we actually saw an increase in PM 2.5 concentrations. During that same time, we saw a decrease in wind speeds, and we also saw a decrease in temperatures. And that will generally mean you have that kind of lower mixed layer. So those meteorological conditions are less favorable for pollutant dispersion. So we might actually expect higher pollution during this particular April in 2020. Again, we do see that with PM 2.5, but we don't see that with nitrogen dioxide and carbon monoxide. For the month of May, it really shows a different story to a certain degree. Again, we still saw a fairly significant decrease in nitrogen dioxide concentrations on the order of 25% reduction. We saw a decrease in carbon monoxide concentrations, a larger decrease than the prior month. And we actually saw a pretty decent reduction in PM 2.5 concentrations, close to 25% reduction. So while we saw higher PM 2.5 for the month of April, we saw lower PM 2.5 for the month of May. And our meteorological conditions on average for the month were similar to May in that we saw lower wind speeds and we saw lower ambient temperatures. So again, with lower wind speeds and lower temperatures on average, we might expect to see higher pollution. I'll try to summarize this here, and then it can take any questions you may have. Again, the changes in meteorological conditions and concurrent changes in emissions certainly makes it quantifying the impact challenging. challenging. Even though the meteorological conditions this spring may have favored higher pollution levels due to lower wind speeds and lower temperatures, we did see decreases in many pollutants. Again, nitrogen dioxide saw the most consistent and significant decrease, on the order of about a 25% reduction. And this is likely due to mobile source emission reductions. We know we've seen reduced traffic, and NO2 is strongly tied to mobile source emissions. PM 2.5 concentrations, on the other hand, we saw quite a mix. We saw approximately 25% increase in concentrations in the month of April, and we saw about a 25% reduction in PM 2.5 concentrations for the month of May. And again, this is with similar meteorological conditions in place. PM 2.5 has a much more diverse source mix. It's less significantly tied to mobile source emissions and maybe more tied to non-point sources and point sources. Some of those, we did get some open burning complaints in April and May, and we did receive less complaints in May than April. So it's possible that the PM 2.5 concentration changes from April to May could be tied to open burning that may have been occurring. Again, with people at home more, it's really hard to know exactly what kind of changes people may have been making. And then finally, with carbon monoxide, we did see a slight decrease in concentration. So overall, we did see reductions in pollution, but we did see some increases in pollution as well, which again is that PM 2.5 concentrations for the month of April. I'm trying to advance to the next slide. Okay, yeah. So Chairman Hilton, I'm happy to take any questions that you or the board may have.
Well, thank you very much, but I only have one question. When I reviewed the complaint investigation report, I noticed that we had at least 8 or 9 complaints with open burning. Is this normal for this time of year in May?
I'll probably let Ms. Hamilton or Mr. Talley speak on that. All I know is that we did have a reduction in May compared to April, but I'm not sure how those compared to typical.
Okay.
Chairman Hilton.
Yes.
Thank you. This is Ms. Hamilton. We did see an uptick in open burning complaints in the month of April. It was very noticeable. People were home a lot, able to work in their yards. It was cool, and people didn't have many outside things to do. In May, we went from 27 open burn complaints to 20.
Wow.
We
okay.
see open burning for a variety of reasons. Springtime is one of those reasons when folks are cleaning their yards. And again, the weather was very favorable for people being outside and enjoying the legal fire pit, which we often get calls on because people are concerned about, air quality at the present time. So I don't think it's highly unusual given our current circumstances, but glad to see those open burning events really kind of falling off.
Okay. Well, thank you. I just, when I looked at some of the reports, it seemed to, I wasn't aware that we had so many open burning complaints in the past compared to this year. I mean, compared to other years. So, well, thank you. Are there any questions on the presentation? Thank you very much.
Yes, I have a question. Just from observation that obviously the cars and the mobile sources have decreased, that air traffic has decreased. Again, this is just observations. Do you have information related to stationary source levels of emissions decrease, or do they stay pretty steady state?
Ms. Hamilton, I might let you take that one again.
Yeah, Steve, we have some anecdotal information that some of our facilities were curtailed, but many of the facilities here in Louisville are part of the federal critical infrastructure, so they weren't impacted by the shutdowns the way other businesses were. We don't have anything other than that anecdotal information, but we have talked internally about possibly reaching out to companies post-COVID to try to get an idea of how it impacted their operations.
Thank you. And follow up on the open burning. Is that I realize it's problematic, but is that a significant contributions to in a region-wide basis or county-wide basis? I mean, does the increase of a dozen people not have that big of impact?
Depends on where they're burning, what they're burning, and how much they're burning. You know, certainly, whether it's something that we pick up on our monitors from a national ambient air quality standard, and we do sometimes see open burns that do affect our monitors. That's one issue. More importantly, it can be an issue that affects a neighbor, and that's really, you know, another place where our nuisance rules kick in. For our Louisville, it's not only a particulate matter issue, but because of the contribution of nitrogen oxides from combustion, it's also an issue that gives us concern during ozone season.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from any board members? If not, Brian, thank you for.
Jeff has one.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me, Carl?
Yeah. Yes.
A question or two for Brian.
Okay.
When the concentrations you're talking about, are these like 24-hour averages or monthly averages, or what are they?
They're essentially, they'd be monthly averages. So
I see.
Taking all the hours and just averaging it for that month.
Of course, for
it is kind of a 30,000 kind of foot, you know, initial review of the data.
Right. On the carbon monoxide, were you averaging over all sites, or looking at one particular site?
So I did average. So we have two sites for carbon monoxide, and one is our near road site, which is near I-264 and I-65. But I did average the two sites to get just kind of a monthly average. Both sites did see, both for NO2 and for carbon monoxide, did see reductions. I wasn't able to go. I didn't go into too much detail to determine, you know, if one site had a significantly greater reduction than the other, but I averaged them both here.
I see. I would think. You said there's a near road side, and the other side is not near road?
Correct.
Yeah. For the near road side, I would really expect that during April, anyway, and possibly May, those would be less because there has been less traffic. That's sort of observable there, and particularly for CO, a lot of that has to come from automobile traffic. The 2.5, a lot of that aerosol will be coming from long-range transport, regional transport. Not probably only a fraction of that is local anyway, so you have to kind of look at the national mix. But it's interesting. I think we can probably expect in the next year or two, there will probably be a national study. Someone is bound to do this, you know, where they just look at a bunch of cities together, look at the emissions, and look at the concentration changes during the COVID time. So that would be an interesting.
Absolutely. There's a wealth of data
Also,
there.
There's a wealth of data there. Yeah. So we know in other countries, particularly some of the very polluted cities you talked about, there have been really large reductions in air contaminants. So maybe one of the good things, maybe the only good thing about the global pandemic that we're seeing is the air quality is a little better in many places. So thank you, Brian.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Are there any
Dr.
other questions from any of the board members? Brian, thank you for a very well detailed report. It's very interesting. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Got any other questions from board members? Okay. Well, Mr. Tyler, thank you for your update. The other staff reports were distributed electronically. Do you have any questions regarding the air quality data, the PM 2.5 monitoring report, or the enforcement status report, excess emission report? And I think we sort of touched on the complaint investigation with the number of complaints regarding open burning. Are there any other questions from any board members regarding these reports?
No.
Chairman Hilton,
Yes.
this is Keith. I just want to point out for the board members, the last page of the air quality report does have a brief summary of Brian's report, and it has one of the charts up. So there's some information in that report on there.
Thank you. I have one question I'd like to ask Mrs. Hamilton. You sent us some information that EPA had published regarding the RMP facilities, the risk management facilities. And I noticed that of the, we made the top, well, I think over 70 facilities. And I think we came in 66. How many, do you know right off how many RMP facilities we have in Jefferson County?
Chairman Hilton, we have about 19 to 20 facilities here in Louisville that are subject to the risk management program. And for those who've joined us, the Louisville Metro Air Pollution Control District issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking on the risk management program on May 15th. That advance notice of proposed rulemaking is out for public comment through August 25th. As Chairman Hilton mentioned, the US EPA recently finalized some amendments to the program. There were additional amendments made in a prior administration that the current EPA administration chose not to adopt. We are seeking comment on those provisions and as to whether they would be appropriate here at a local level instead of at a national level. So you'll find on our website the advance notice of proposed rulemaking that includes the discussion of the information that Chairman Hilton mentioned, along with an FAQ sheet and some cost analyses information. So that's on our proposed docket page. We invite the public and our regulated communities to take a look at that and to provide us with comments in this current informal rulemaking phase.
Okay, I think, is it possible, it's possible that we could probably have some public hearings regarding the RMP facilities here in Louisville?
Thank you for asking. What we believe we'll do is before we start that formal process, which will include a public hearing where the board will hear the district's recommendation on that rulemaking, we'd like to have some public meetings. Unfortunately, It looks like some of those may also be by WebEx. We will be announcing those and sending out information as we get those scheduled. And again, we invite the public to attend those and learn more about the advance notice of proposed rulemaking, the current federal RMP program, and the proposed changes that could be made to our program.
Thank you very much. Are there any other questions or comments regarding what has taken place this morning from any of the board members?
From me.
If not, I will now adjourn the regular meeting of the board and thank you for your participation. The next board meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, July the 15th, 2020 at 10 a.m. Thank you very much. Have a safe day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mhm.